The afternoon sunlight faded slowly over the dirt road, painting the horizon a weary gold. The wind swept dry leaves around her feet. Her cane marked a crooked rhythm on the ground. Her daughter-in-law had left minutes earlier, leaving behind only dust and a flat, emotionless sentence. Before we dive into this story, please leave a comment below with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The afternoon sunlight faded slowly over the dirt road, painting the horizon a weary gold that seemed to reflect the elderly woman's own short breaths as she moved forward with uneven steps. The wind swept dry leaves around her feet, and her worn cane marked a crooked rhythm on the ground that seemed to echo the quickened pace of a heart that knew abandonment intimately. Her daughter-in-law had left minutes earlier, leaving behind only the tracks of the car and a final, emotionless sentence, as if shedding a burden, not a life. Without looking back, without hesitation, like someone completing an unpleasant task and moving on. The woman remained there for a moment, staring at the dust suspended in the air, until she gathered enough strength to continue walking toward the ranch she barely remembered existing. A place forgotten by the years, by its owners, and now used as a storage unit for what she had become in her daughter-in-law's eyes. A silent inconvenience. Her legs ached. The heat of the afternoon sun pressed on the back of her neck. Her suitcase weighed more than it should, and she wondered why she had brought so many things if she knew she wouldn't need any of them. Perhaps it was the habit of a lifetime spent organizing, caring, preparing. Perhaps it was the illusion that she still had a choice. The property slowly came into view, hidden among tall weeds and overgrown trees. The house had a crooked roof, broken fences, and windows that seemed to watch her approach with the same indifference with which life had treated her in recent weeks. The gate lay on the ground, and she had to step over it, gripping her cane tightly to keep from losing her balance. In that instant, the elderly woman felt a chill deeper than physical, a chill that came from the realization that she had been brought here to disappear without a trace, to vanish from the sight, from the thoughts, from the existence of those who should protect her. Her trembling hand touched the warped door, feeling the roughness of the wood and the unsettling sense that the entire place seemed to carry its own grief. She pushed gently. The door groaned open, slicing through the afternoon silence, revealing a dark, dusty interior filled with broken furniture and a smell of mildew that clung to her throat. She stepped inside carefully, her eyes taking time to adjust to the gloom. There was no electricity, no running water, nothing but peeling walls and a floor covered with dry leaves that the wind had pushed inside over the years. The first night brought no rest. It brought the sound of the wind seeping through the cracks, the groan of the old floorboards yielding to the weight of someone trying to survive, and a silence that at times seemed larger than her own thoughts. She lay on an old mattress she found in one of the rooms, pulled her shawl over herself, and lay there, eyes open, listening to the sounds of the house and trying not to think about what would happen when the food ran out. Her daughter-in-law had left a bag with a few things: stale bread, a bottle of water, cans of sardines, and crackers. Nothing that would last more than a few days. Nothing that showed any intention of returning. She tried not to cry. Crying hurt more than hunger. It hurt because it brought to the surface everything she had been pushing down over the past few months. The growing loneliness in her son's house, the way her daughter-in-law looked at her with that mix of impatience and disdain, the increasingly silent meals, her room, which seemed to shrink as if they were slowly taking away her space, erasing her presence, preparing the ground for what was to come. And she said nothing. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for help, because she believed she was a burden, because she thought she deserved that treatment, because she was afraid of losing the only tie that still connected her to her son. The following days proved to be a battle of small defeats. The food left by her daughter-in-law was meager and quickly became insufficient. The well water, though murky, was still better than the growing thirst that gripped her chest. She tied a bucket to an old rope, slowly lowered it until she heard the splash of water below, and pulled it back with a strength she no longer possessed. The water came up turbid, tasting of earth, but it quenched her thirst. She filtered it as best she could, using an old cloth she found in a drawer, and drank slowly, feeling the liquid trickle down her dry throat. The elderly woman tried to clear a space to call her own, dragging broken furniture, chasing away decades of dust, and fighting an exhaustion that always seemed 2 steps ahead of her. Every gesture was slow, measured by a body that no longer responded as it once did. Yet there was a remnant of dignity in every movement, as if the simple fact of existing was a silent form of resistance. She swept the floor, cleared away cobwebs, arranged the few clothes she had brought on an old chair. It wasn't much. It was nothing. But it was hers, and at that moment, it was all she had. At night, lying again on the old mattress, she held against her chest the framed portrait of her husband, the only thing that truly mattered in her suitcase. His face, serious and gentle at the same time, looked at her from within that old black-and-white photograph. He had died 5 years earlier, taken by a sudden heart attack, and since then she felt she had lost not only her companion, but also the only place where she truly belonged. Her son was affectionate, yes, but he was always busy, always traveling, always in a hurry. And when he got married, the distance grew even wider. Her daughter-in-law never liked her. That was clear from the start, but it was subtle. A forced smile, a short answer, a forgotten invitation, nothing that could be openly denounced, nothing her son would notice. And she accepted it, because she didn't want to cause problems, because she didn't want to be the interfering mother-in-law, because she thought that with time things would improve. They didn't improve. They worsened. Little by little, she was pushed to the margins of her own life until the margin became a precipice. She clutched the portrait to her chest and finally let the tears fall. She cried softly so no one would hear, even knowing there was no one for miles. She cried for the life she had, for the life she lost, for the life she would no longer have. She cried for her son who didn't know where she was. She cried for her husband who was no longer there to protect her. She cried for herself, for the woman who was once strong and now could barely carry a bucket of water. The next day, she woke with a sore body and an even drier mouth. The well water had run out faster than she imagined, and she would need to lower the bucket again. She got up slowly, feeling every bone protest, and walked to the outdoor area where the well was located. The sun was already high, scorching her skin and making the air shimmer above the dry earth. She gripped the rope, took a deep breath and began to lower the bucket. Her hands burned, her arms trembled, but she continued because there was no other option. As she pulled the bucket back up, the rope slipped from her hands and the bucket fell back into the well with a dull thud. She stood there looking into the darkness below, feeling defeat grip her chest. There was no way to retrieve the bucket without help, no way to get water without the bucket, no way to survive without water. The options closed like slamming doors, one after another, until only emptiness remained. But she didn't give up. She went back inside the house and looked for something she could use. She found an old, empty paint can, tied a piece of wire she found in the barn to it, and returned to the well. She slowly lowered the can, holding the wire carefully so it wouldn't, and cut her and managed to pull up a little water. It wasn't much, it wasn't enough, but it was something, and something at that moment was the difference between living and dying. Gradually, small details began to reveal something greater than mere negligence. A box with forgotten documents at the back of a cabinet revealed letters she had never read, addressed to her by her own son. His firm handwriting, his words of affection, his questions about how she was doing. Correspondence that should never have been hidden. Letters sent over the past few months, always asking how she was, saying he missed her, telling her about work, about plans to return soon. Letters that her daughter-in-law intercepted and hid, building a wall of silence between mother and son. The elderly woman realized line after line that the distance between her and her son was not a result of a lack of love, but of silent manipulations by her daughter-in-law, constructed over the months he dedicated himself to business. Her hand trembled not from physical exertion, but from the weight of understanding that finally fell upon her shoulders. Her son didn't know, he knew nothing, and she was there, slowly, dying, while he lived believing everything was fine. She sat on the floor, holding the letters against her chest, and felt a rage she had never known. It wasn't anger at her son. It was anger at being deceived, at believing she was forgotten when in fact she was hidden, at accepting abandonment as deserved when in reality it was manufactured. The truth hurt more than the lie, because it showed that everything could have been different, that she didn't have to be there, that her son still cared but never knew she was disappearing. She carefully put the letters away, folded in her dress pocket, as if they were proof of a crime that still needed to be reported. But report it to whom? There was no one, no phone, no way to get out of there alone. The road was long, the sun was cruel, and her legs barely supported her within the house itself. She was trapped, and her daughter-in-law knew it. She counted on it. The ranch also held its own secrets. One afternoon, while looking for something to eat, she found an old trunk behind a detached wall containing dried provisions, antique tools, and a small photo album of previous owners, revealing fragments of lives that had passed there before everything crumbled. There were photos of a family smiling in front of the house when it still had fresh paint and intact windows, children playing in the yard, an elderly couple sitting on the porch, looking at the camera with that discreet pride of those who built something with their own hands. It was as if the place wanted to show that ruins don't appear overnight. They are always the result of accumulated neglect, the same neglect she now faced. The elderly woman felt, in that instant, a strange identification with the house, both left behind, both considered unusable by those seeking comfort, both still standing even if crooked, even if forgotten, both silent witnesses that merely existing is a form of resistance. The dried provisions in the trunk were too old to be consumed, but the tools were still functional. She picked up a rusty hammer, some bent nails, and began to fix what she could. She nailed loose boards to the windows to keep the wind out at night. She adjusted the bedroom door so it would close properly. She cleaned the wood-burning stove she found in the corner of the kitchen and tried to light it with dry kindling. It took time. Her hands trembled. The smoke irritated her eyes. But eventually she managed a small, fragile flame that illuminated the dark room and brought a little warmth. That night, sitting by the fire, she ate the last piece of bread her daughter-in-law had left. She chewed slowly, savoring every crumb, knowing that after that nothing but hunger would remain. She thought about giving up. She thought about just lying down and waiting for the end to come. But something in her, perhaps stubbornness, perhaps self-respect, perhaps just the instinct to survive, refused to surrender. She wasn't going to die there. Not like that. Not without her son knowing the truth. In the following days, she began to explore the ranch surroundings. There was an abandoned garden patch at the back of the property, overgrown with weeds, but still with some wild collard greens and potatoes. She pulled up the collard leaves, washed them in the murky well water, and ate them raw, tasting their bitter but nutritious flavor. She dug the earth with her hands and found small potatoes which she cooked on the wood-burning stove. It wasn't much. It wasn't delicious. But it was food. And food meant another day. another chance. Meanwhile, miles away, her son was returning from his trip, unaware of anything that had happened. The company van dropped him off in front of his house in the middle of the afternoon, and he got out, carrying his suitcase and the fatigue of almost 2 weeks dealing with suppliers, contracts, and endless meetings. But he also carried the pleasant anticipation of seeing his mother again, of telling her about the trip, of hearing her advice that always seemed to hit the mark, even when he didn't want to admit it. He opened the door, expecting the smell of food, the television on loud because his mother didn't hear so well anymore, and maybe even her sitting in his armchair just to tease him playfully. But what he found was silence, a heavy, strange silence that didn't belong in that house. He immediately noticed how the house seemed too tidy, too silent, everything in its place, no sound, no sign of her. His mother's room was impeccable, as if she had never lived there, the closet empty. Her chair removed from the living room. The medication she took were no longer in the bathroom. Her slippers were no longer beside the bed. Every detail was an alert, an open wound, a scream he still didn't hear. His heart began to race. His hands began to sweat. He walked through the house calling for her, opening doors, looking in every room, feeling panic grow with each second of silence. When he finally found his wife in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if nothing were wrong, he asked with a trembling voice where his mother was. The answer came too casually, too rehearsed. She had gone to visit a cousin out of state. She was going to stay there for a few days. She had left a message. He didn't need to worry, but his wife's silence when he asked for the cousin's name was more eloquent than any well-constructed lie. Her tense look, the quick gesture of hiding her phone, all the small failures of someone who believed she would have more time before being confronted. He didn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. His mother would never travel without letting him know. She would never leave the house without talking to him first. She would never simply disappear without leaving a phone number, an address, some way of contact. He knew his mother. He knew her fears, her quirks, the way she always needed to be sure everything was fine before leaving home. And now she had simply vanished, and his wife expected him to believe a poorly told story. He started looking for clues. He opened his mother's closet and saw that clothes were missing, but not the clothes she would take for a casual visit. Her old clothes were missing, the ones she wore at home, the ones she wouldn't mind losing. He opened the drawers and found important documents his mother would never leave behind. Her birth certificate, her driver's license, even her photo album with his father was still there, hidden at the back of the drawer. His mother hadn't taken anything that truly mattered, or rather, she hadn't had a chance to take anything. His breathing grew heavy. His body moved through the house like someone searching not just for someone, but for himself. He went to the room he shared with his wife and started ransacking her things. She protested, tried to stop him, but he didn't stop. He opened drawers, closets, bags, until he found her locked phone. He demanded the password. She refused. He insisted, and his tone of voice, something she had never heard before, made her give in. On the phone, he found messages, conversations with friends about his mother-in-law being a burden, plans to get rid of her in a way no one could blame them, references to an abandoned ranch in the remote countryside where no one would look, and finally, a message sent 3 days earlier. Problem solved. She won't be coming back. He read. He reread. He felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. His wife tried to explain, to say it wasn't what it seemed, but her words were just noise. He couldn't hear anything but the blood pounding in his ears. When he found his mother's suitcase hidden in the car trunk of his wife's car, the understanding finally clicked. There was no more room for doubt. The suitcase was dented, with dirt marks, as if it had been thrown on the ground. Inside, his mother's clothes folded with the care only she possessed, her pill organizer, the shawl that belonged to his grandmother, and, hidden among the clothes, a note written in his mother's trembling handwriting. "If something happens to me, know that I love you and that I tried to be strong until the end." He collapsed. Right there, on the garage floor, clutching the suitcase to his chest, he collapsed. He cried as he hadn't cried since his father's death. He cried for the mother he hadn't known how to protect. He cried for having been blind, for having trusted, for having let that woman destroy the only person he truly loved. He cried for the guilt he already knew he would carry forever, no matter what happened next. His wife tried to approach, but he raised his hand, asking her to stay away. He didn't want to hear. He didn't want excuses. He wanted nothing more than to find his mother. He grabbed the car keys, ignored his wife's protests, and drove off without knowing exactly where to go. But her phone was still in his hand, and the messages contained an address, an abandoned ranch 30 miles away, a place forgotten by God and man, a perfect place to hide someone you want to disappear. The road to the ranch became a path of urgency, fear, and anticipated guilt. The dust raised by the tires accompanied his acceleration, and each turn seemed to bring him closer to something he couldn't yet name. The sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky orange and red, and he drove with his hands clenched on the steering wheel and his jaw locked. He thought of his mother. He thought of how many days she had been alone. He wondered if she was still alive. He thought of everything he should have noticed and didn't. The asphalt road gave way to a dirt track, and the car began to shake over the uneven path. He didn't slow down. He couldn't. Every second counted. Every minute could be the difference between finding her alive or finding only what was left of her. Guilt gnawed at him like a hungry beast, reminding him of every time he came home tired and barely spoke to his mother, of every trip he took without asking if she was okay, of every sign he ignored because it was easier to believe everything was all right. The GPS stopped working a few miles back, but he kept following the road, guided only by the description he had read in the messages. An old ranch, a fallen gate, a house with a crooked roof. It couldn't be hard to find, not in such an abandoned area. And finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he saw it. The fallen gate, the broken fences, the tilted house with windows that looked like empty holes, staring at nothing. When he arrived at the ranch, the contrast between what he remembered and what he saw hit him like a blow. Not that he knew this place, but somehow he knew. He knew no one, survived there for long. He knew that leaving someone in that place was like signing a slow death sentence. The fallen gate, the leaning house, the deep silence that enveloped everything. It was as if even the birds had given up on that patch of land. He parked the car haphazardly and ran out. His mother's cane lay beside the door, and that detail, so small, so simple, was the deepest cut. That cane she carried everywhere since his father died. That cane she clutched tightly when she was nervous. That cane that was now lying on the ground, as if it no longer mattered. As if she no longer mattered. He picked it up with trembling hands and entered the house without thinking, without caution, just calling, shouting, begging her to answer. His voice echoed through the empty rooms, returning to him unanswered. He opened doors, looked under broken furniture, climbed stairs that groaned under his weight. Nothing. She wasn't there. Or she was, but couldn't respond. Panic seized him in a way he had never felt before. It was as if the floor was disappearing beneath his feet, as if air could no longer reach his lungs. That's when he heard it, a faint noise, an almost inaudible groan coming from the barn out back. He ran. He crossed the overgrown yard, stepped over rusty tools lying on the ground, almost tripped over rocks hidden in the tall grass. The barn door was ajar, swaying gently in the wind. He pushed it open and entered, and the smell of mold and old hay hit him like a wall. And there, in the darkest corner of the barn, was the fragile figure of the elderly woman, huddled among old bales of hay. Her eyes closed more from exhaustion than unconsciousness. Her husband's portrait clutched to her chest, as if it were the last fragment of life she could hold on to. Her clothes dirty, her face thin, her lips cracked, her hands bruised with marks of dirt and dried blood. She was so small, so fragile, so different from the strong woman he had known her entire life. He fell to his knees beside her, holding her face between his hands, calling softly, "Mom, Mom, please, wake up. Look at me, please." His voice was choked, broken, desperate. She opened her eyes slowly with effort, and when she finally focused on him, the expression she made was of someone who couldn't believe what she was seeing, as if he were a mirage, as if it were too late to be real. "Son?" Her voice was hoarse, weak, almost inaudible. "Is that really you?" "It's me, Mum. It's me. I'm so sorry. So sorry." He held her hand, feeling how cold it was, how fragile. "I'm getting you out of here. I'm taking you home. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay, I promise." But she shook her head slowly, as if she didn't even have the strength to properly disagree. He didn't understand, didn't want to understand. He simply picked her up in his arms, feeling how light she was, and carried her out of the barn. She didn't protest. She didn't have the strength to protest. She just let herself be carried, her head resting on his shoulder and her eyes closed again. He placed her in the back seat of the car, took off his jacket, and carefully covered her. He grabbed the bottle of water he had in the car and slowly moistened her lips. She drank a little, but soon began to cough. He waited for her to calm down, wiped her face with his shirt sleeve, and then ran back to the house. He grabbed her suitcase, her shawl, everything he found that belonged to her. He wouldn't leave anything behind. He wouldn't leave any trace of her in that cursed place. When he returned to the car, she was awake, looking out the window with a distant expression. He got in, adjusted the rear-view mirror so he could see her, and started driving back. But this time slowly, carefully, as if he were carrying the most precious thing in the world. And he was. During the drive he tried to talk, tried to explain that he didn't know, that he would never have imagined, that if he had known, he would have come back sooner. But the words came out confused, jumbled, useless. How to explain the inexplicable? How to ask forgiveness for the unforgivable? She didn't answer. She just looked out the window, watching the landscape pass, perhaps thinking about everything that had happened, perhaps nothing, just existing, just breathing. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw her holding the portrait of his father. Her fingers trembled, but her grip was firm. And in that moment he understood. He understood that she survived, not because of him, but despite him. She survived for her father's memory, for stubbornness, for self-respect that not even abandonment could completely kill, and that realization hurt more than anything else. When they returned to town, he didn't take her home. He took her straight to the hospital. She tried to protest, said she was fine, but he didn't listen. He wasn't going to risk it. Not after everything. He carried her in his arms to the emergency room, ignored the nurse's questions, just asked them to take care of her, to do whatever was necessary, to not let anything go unnoticed. The doctors took her inside, and he remained in the waiting room, sitting on an uncomfortable chair, his hands dirty with earth, and his heart too heavy to beat properly. The guilt didn't lessen, no matter how many times he told himself that he didn't know, that he was deceived, that he was also a victim. The truth was, he should have noticed. He should have seen the signs. He should have protected his mother the same way she always protected him. Hours later, a doctor came to speak with him. His mother was dehydrated, malnourished, with low blood pressure and signs of extreme stress. But she would survive. She would be okay. She needed rest, hydration, and care. But she would be okay. He heard the words and felt his knees buckle. He leaned against the wall and took a deep breath for the first time in hours. She was going to be okay. There was still time. He could still fix things. But when he entered the room and saw her lying in the hospital bed, connected to IVs and machines, so small, in that large bed, he knew that some things couldn't be fixed. Some wounds were too deep, some betrayals left scars that no amount of time would erase. And he would have to live with that. He would have to wake up every day knowing he almost lost his mother because he wasn't present, because he trusted the wrong person, because he was blind when he needed to see most. He sat beside the bed and held her hand. She opened her eyes slowly and looked at him. She said nothing. He didn't either. They just stayed there, in silence, with their fingers intertwined and an abyss of unspoken words between them. But it was a beginning, a painful, difficult beginning, but still a beginning. In the days that followed, the house became a silent battlefield. His wife tried to approach his mother, tried to apologize, tried to justify what she did as a moment of weakness, of desperation, of not knowing what to do. But her words bounced off a wall of silence that the elderly woman had erected around herself. She didn't shout, she didn't curse, she didn't make a scene. She simply looked at her daughter-in-law with an empty expression, as one looks at something that deserves neither hatred nor forgiveness, just indifference. And that hurt more than any accusation. The son also didn't speak to his wife. They slept in separate rooms. They ate at different times. They passed each other like strangers sharing the same space. He dedicated all his time to his mother. He prepared her meals. He gave her medication on time. He sat by her bed and told her about his day, about work, about mundane things, just so she would know he was there, that he wouldn't abandon her again. But the elderly woman was different, quieter, more distant, as if a part of her had been left behind on that ranch and couldn't come back. She ate little, slept even less. She spent hours looking out the window, watching the street, people coming and going with their normal lives, and seemed unable to reconnect with that world, as if she had crossed a line and was now trapped between two places, not quite belonging to either. One afternoon, while she was sitting on the porch, her son brought the letters he had found at the ranch, the letters he had written to her that his wife had intercepted. He placed them on the small table beside her and said, his voice choked, that he hadn't known, that he had written, that he had always cared, that he would never have let her go through that if he had known. She looked at the letters, ran her fingers over their time-yellowed edges, but didn't open them. She just shook her head slowly. "I know, son. Now I know." Her voice was tired, but there was no accusation, just a realization, just the weight of someone who learned that knowing the truth doesn't always bring relief. Sometimes it just brings more questions, more doubts, a different kind of pain. He wanted to say something more, but couldn't find the words. He sat beside her, and they remained there in silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange. It was a strange moment, neither sad nor happy, just real. Just two survivors of a war they hadn't chosen to fight, trying to understand what remained when the smoke finally cleared. That night, after his mother had gone to sleep, the son finally confronted his wife. She was in the kitchen, making tea, and when he entered, she turned around startled, as if she had been expecting this moment for days, but still wasn't ready. He didn't yell. He didn't bang on the table. He didn't do anything dramatic. He just asked, with a calm that was more frightening than any outburst, "Why?" She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. She tried to explain how she felt replaced, how his mother took up too much space, how she was jealous of his attention, how she just wanted it to be just the two of them. But each justification sounded emptier than the last. Because deep down she knew. She knew there was no justification. She knew what she did was unforgivable. That abandoning an elderly woman to die alone wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. And she chose. He listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, he simply said he wanted a divorce. He said he couldn't look at her anymore without seeing the ranch, without seeing his mother huddled in the barn, without feeling disgust. He said he tried to understand, tried to find some way to forgive, but he couldn't. He wouldn't be able to, because what she did wasn't against him. It was against the person he loved most in the world, and that was unforgivable. She tried to argue, said they could go to therapy, that with time he would get over it, that everyone deserves a second chance. But he had already made up his mind. He had already spoken with a lawyer. He had already sorted out the documents. He wanted her to leave the house, not immediately, because he knew she needed time to get organized. But he wanted her to leave, and the sooner, the better. His wife still tried to play the love card. She reminded him of their years together, of the plans they had made, of the marriage they had. But he just shook his head. Love doesn't do what you did. Love doesn't abandon. Love doesn't hide letters. Love doesn't lie. What we had wasn't love. It was convenience, and now not even that remains. She realized she had lost. She realized too late that she had underestimated the bond between mother and son, that she thought she could erase his mother from his life and he wouldn't even notice, that she was arrogant enough to believe he would choose her over his own mother, and now she was alone, without a husband, without a home, without the future she had planned. Only guilt and the awareness that she had dug her own hole remained. In the following days, the house grew even more tense. His wife started packing her bags, slowly, procrastinating, as if, while she was still there was a chance to reverse things. But there wasn't. Her son barely looked at her, and when he did, it was with that coldness that only comes from someone who has been betrayed in an unforgettable way. The elderly woman avoided being in the same room as her daughter-in-law, and when they inevitably crossed paths, she simply turned her face away and moved on. One morning, while her son was at work, his wife made one last attempt to speak to his mother. She knocked on her bedroom door and entered without waiting for a response. The elderly woman was sitting on the bed, folding clothes, and when she saw her daughter-in-law, she stopped what she was doing and just waited to see what she wanted, waited to see if there was anything left to be said. His wife began to speak. She said she was sorry, that she wasn't a bad person, that she just made a mistake. A big mistake, yes, but still a mistake, that she deserved forgiveness, that she deserved a chance to make amends. The elderly woman listened in silence, with the same empty expression as before. When her daughter-in-law finished, she simply said, in a calm but firm voice, "You didn't leave me on that ranch by mistake. You left me there to die. And if my son hadn't found me, I would have. I died. You counted on that. So no, you don't deserve forgiveness, not from me." His wife tried to argue, but the elderly woman raised her hand, asking for silence. "I spent days in that place thinking my son had forgotten me, thinking I didn't matter, thinking my life was worth nothing. You stole that from me. You stole my dignity, my peace, my trust. And now you want me to say it's all okay, that it was just a mistake. No, it's not okay, and it never will be." His wife left the room with her eyes full of tears. But they were tears of self-pity, not genuine remorse. Tears of someone who lost the game, not of someone who understood the gravity of what she had done. And the elderly woman knew it. That's why she didn't forgive. Not because she was cruel, but because some things are beyond forgiveness. Some wounds don't heal. Some betrayals cannot be forgotten. 2 weeks later, his wife finally moved out. She took her belongings in a taxi, without goodbyes, without hugs, without promises to stay in touch. She just left. And when the door closed behind her, the elderly woman and her son stood there in the living room feeling a strange relief. It wasn't happiness, it wasn't victory, it was just the end of a painful chapter, the end of a presence that poisoned that place. The house became quieter after that, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of loneliness or tension, it was the silence of peace, of a new beginning, of the chance to build something new on the ruins of what had been destroyed. Mother and son began to relearn how to live together. They started talking again, laughing again, sharing household, chores, meals, the small moments of everyday life. He started preparing her breakfast the way she liked it again. She started giving him advice about his work again. They started watching movies together on the couch again, with her complaining that he always chose the most complicated movies, and him retorting that she only wanted to watch melodramas. Small things, simple things. But it was these small things that rebuilt what had been broken. One day, while organizing old papers, the son found the ranch documents, that ranch where they had left his mother. He discovered that the place belonged to his ex-wife's family, abandoned for years due to debt and disinterest, and he had an idea that seemed strange at first, but made sense in a crooked way. He was going to buy that ranch. He was going to renovate it. He was going to transform it into the opposite of what it represented. No longer a symbol of abandonment, but a symbol of a new beginning. When he told his mother, she remained silent for a long time. He waited without pressuring, giving her space to process. Finally, she asked why. Why go back to that place? Why not just forget? And he answered with a sincerity that took her by surprise. Because I need to. I need to transform that place into something good. I need to take its weight away. I need to show that abandonment doesn't win. She thought about it. She thought about the ranch, about the days she spent there, about the fear, the hunger, the loneliness. But she also thought about the letters she found, about the trunk with stories of other families, about the house that was once a home and became a ruin. And she understood what her son was trying to do. He wasn't just renovating a ranch. He was renovating a memory. He was trying to fix what was broken, not just between them, but within himself. Then she agreed. She said she would help. Not physically, because her body still didn't allow it, but she would be there. She would watch the transformation happen. She would witness the place that almost killed her turn into something that could bring life. And somehow that seemed important. It seemed necessary. Like closing an open cycle, the following months were filled with intense work. Her son hired masons, painters, and electricians. He repaired the roof, fixed the windows, painted the walls, mended the fences. He cleared the land, planted flowers, and restored the vegetable garden. Every weekend he went there and worked alongside the laborers, sweating, tiring, but feeling that each brick laid was a piece of guilt being left behind. His mother accompanied him on the visits. She sat on the porch while he worked, watching the transformation happen little by little. At first, it was difficult. Seeing that place again brought back memories she preferred to have forgotten. But with time, as the house changed, the memories also began to change. The barn where he found her became a studio with large windows that let the sun in. The room where she spent sleepless nights became a library full of books and a comfortable armchair. The kitchen where she cooked potatoes on a wood-burning stove became a modern, cozy space full of light. She realized little by little that she was healing, that every change in the house was a change in her too, that by transforming that place, she was transforming the way she saw herself, no longer as a victim, but as a survivor, no longer as someone who was abandoned, but as someone who resisted. And this change in perspective was liberating. One afternoon, while they were on the porch of the renovated ranch, drinking coffee and watching the sunset. She said something he didn't expect. She said she wanted to spend a few days there, not out of obligation, but by choice. She wanted to sleep in that transformed house. She wanted to wake up there and feel that she belonged. She wanted to prove to herself that the place no longer had power over her, that she had power over the place. He hesitated. He was afraid it was too soon, afraid she wasn't ready, but he looked into her eyes and saw determination. He saw strength. He saw a woman who had survived the worst and now wanted to prove she could do more. So he agreed. He said he would stay with her, that he wouldn't leave her alone, and she smiled. A small, tired, but real smile. They spent a weekend at the ranch. They cooked together. They walked around the property. They sat on the porch and talked about everything and nothing. She told him stories from his childhood that he didn't even remember anymore. He told her about his plans for the future, and gradually that place stopped being the setting of a nightmare and became just a place, a beautiful place, a peaceful place, a place that could be theirs. On their last night before returning to town, she went to the barn, the studio. She stood there looking around, remembering how it was when he found her. Huddled, weak, nearly dead. But now she was standing, strong, alive. And that meant something. It meant she had won, not against her daughter-in-law, not against abandonment, but against fear. The fear that she wasn't enough, the fear that she didn't deserve to be loved, the fear that she was alone. Her son appeared at the door, seeing her there. He asked if everything was okay. She turned to him and nodded. Yes, it is. Everything's okay now. And it was true. For the first time in a long time, everything was okay. When they returned to town, something had changed. Not just at the ranch, but in them. They were lighter, more at peace, as if they had left a huge weight behind. The house in town also seemed different, more cheerful, more alive, as if even the walls felt the difference. Her son returned to work with more energy. His mother went back to taking care of the house, but without the former burden. It was no longer a duty. It was a choice. She wanted to be there. She wanted to care for that space. She wanted to be part of that life. And he wanted her to be there, not out of obligation or pity, but because he loved her, because her presence made the house a home. The neighbors began to notice the change. They asked where his wife was. He simply replied that they had separated, without going into detail. Some speculated, others judged, but he didn't care. He owed explanations to no one. The only person who mattered was there, sitting in the living room, reading a book and smiling when he passed by. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, she still woke up startled. She dreamed of the ranch as it was before, of the cold, of the hunger, of the loneliness. But then she would just open her eyes and see the familiar room, hear her son's breathing in. The next room, feel the warmth of the blanket and remember that she was safe, that she was home, that no one would take her away again. And little by little, even the nightmares became rarer. Even the bad memories began to lose their grip. They didn't disappear completely. They never would. But they no longer commanded her life. They were just shadows, shadows she had learned to live with. One morning, as she prepared coffee, she noticed she was humming. She couldn't remember the last time she had done that, couldn't remember the last time she felt like singing. And that small gesture, so simple, so mundane, was proof that she had returned. Not completely, not in the same way, but she had returned. She had survived. And now she was living again. Her son entered the kitchen and stopped, listening to her sing. He stood there, a lump in his throat and his eyes watering, because he finally saw. He saw the mother he knew before everything fell apart. He saw the joy he thought he had lost forever. He saw the proof that love, when real, is stronger than any abandonment. She turned and saw him there with that emotional look. She asked what was wrong. He just shook his head and said, "Nothing, Mom. I was just remembering how good it is to have you here." And she smiled, that smile he had known since childhood, that smile that said everything would be okay, that it was already getting okay, that they would be okay. And in that moment, in the morning-lit kitchen, with the smell of fresh coffee in the air and the sound of an old song playing on the radio, they understood that they had made it. They had gotten through the worst. They had survived the storm. And now, finally, they could begin to rebuild. Not what they had before, because that was lost, but something new, something stronger, something forged in pain, but tempered by love. As the months passed, a routine settled in that neither of them had imagined possible. Her son learned to value the small moments. Breakfast together before he left for work, the quick phone call in the middle of the day just to check in, the quiet dinners where they shared how their day had been. Simple things that once went unnoticed now held a different weight. A good weight, a weight of gratitude for still being there, together, alive. The elderly woman also changed, not just physically, regaining the weight and color she had lost, but emotionally. She was more present, more willing to go out, to see people, to participate in life. She returned to the church she had abandoned after her husband's death. She reconnected with old friends she hadn't seen in years. She started knitting again, an activity she had always loved but had put aside due to lack of motivation. And her son noticed. He noticed every small change, every small victory, and he felt proud. Proud of her for fighting, for surviving, for choosing to live again even after everything. But he also felt guilt, a guilt that didn't completely disappear, no matter how many times his mother said it wasn't his fault. Because deep down, he knew he had been negligent, that he had been blind, that he had trusted too much and paid too little attention. One afternoon after work, he came home and found his mother in the living room with visitors. They were 3 ladies from the church, chatting animatedly about a food drive for families in need. His mother was organizing everything, taking down names, delegating tasks, leading the group with a natural ease he hadn't seen in her for a long time. He stood there, watching from a distance, and felt a strange emotion. It was relief, mixed with joy. It was seeing his mother being herself again. When the visitors left, she made tea for the 2 of them, and they sat on the porch. He commented how happy he was to see her so animated again. She gave a small smile and said she was trying to live again, trying not to let what happened define who she was. She said she had difficult days when she just wanted to stay in bed and do nothing. But she also had good days, and the good days were starting to outweigh the bad ones. He held her hand and said he was proud, that he admired her strength, that he didn't know if he would have been able to do the same in her place. She squeezed his hand back and replied that he would never have to find out, because she would be there, always, caring, protecting, the same way he had, cared for and protected her when she needed him. That week, the divorce was officially finalized. The son signed the papers with a strange sense of liberation. He no longer felt anger towards his ex-wife. Not anymore. He only felt pity. Pity for someone who had so much and threw it all away out of pride and selfishness. Pity for someone who would have to live the rest of her life knowing what she had done, carrying that weight, that guilt. He put the documents in a folder and moved forward. Literally, because he had plans for the future, plans that included his mother. She had started talking about wanting a bigger garden at the ranch. She wanted to plant flowers. She wanted to raise chickens. She wanted a place to host her church friends on weekends. And he was all in. He started planning the renovations, researching chicken farming, buying flower seeds she liked. The ranch became a joint project. Every week they went there and worked together. He dug the earth, she planted the seeds, he fixed the chicken coop. She chose the colors of the chickens, small things that brought joy in a simple and honest way. And little by little that place truly became theirs, no longer a symbol of pain, but a symbol of renewal. One day, while they were in the garden, she commented that she wanted to do something. She wanted to plant a tree, a special tree, in the exact spot where the barn used to be, where he found her. She wanted that place, which had witnessed her lowest moment, to now bear witness to something beautiful, something that would grow and provide shade and fruit, something that would last. He liked the idea. They went to a nursery and went. She chose a mulberry tree. She said she had always wanted one, that her father had one at the house where she grew up, and she used to spend hours under it, eating the berries right off the branch. It was a good memory, a childhood memory, a memory from before everything got complicated. They planted the tree together. They dug the hole. They carefully placed the sapling. They covered it with earth. They watered it. And they stood there, looking at that small tree that would one day be big. She squeezed his arm and whispered, "Thank you for saving me, for not giving up on me." He held her hand and replied, "Thank you for not giving up on us." The months continued to pass. The mulberry tree grew slowly but steadily. The chickens laid eggs. The flowers filled the garden with colors. The ranch became a refuge, a place where they could go to slow down, to breathe, to simply be. And that was enough. It was more than enough. That Christmas, they decided to spend the holidays at the ranch. They invited his mother's church friends, some of his co-workers, and prepared a simple yet bountiful Christmas dinner. The house was filled with laughter, conversations, life. And when everyone had left and it was just the two of them sitting on the porch watching the stars, she commented that it had been the best Christmas she had had in years. He agreed. Not because it was luxurious or special in some grand way, but because it was real, because it was surrounded by people who cared, because it was in a place they built together, because it was proof that they had overcome, that they had won. Not against his ex-wife or against abandonment, but against despair, against giving up, against the idea that some things are impossible to fix. On New Year's Day, they made a promise to each other. Not a grand or impossible promise. They just promised to keep going, to keep talking, to keep caring for each other, to keep building that life they had fought so hard to reclaim. They promised not to let routine make them forget what they had almost lost. They promised to value each day as the gift it was. And they kept it. Not perfectly, because life isn't perfect. They had bad days. Days when they argued over silly things. Days when the elderly woman woke up grumpy and her son came home stressed from work. But always, always at the end of the day, they apologized. They talked. They remembered they were lucky. Lucky to still have each other. Lucky to have survived. Lucky to have chosen love instead of resentment. Life went on, as life always does, with ups and downs, with joys and sorrows, with triumphs and losses. But now they faced everything together, as it should have always been, as it finally was. One Sunday morning, while they were at the ranch, the elderly woman asked to take a photo of the two of them in front of the mulberry tree, which was already larger, already showing signs that it would soon bear fruit. He found it strange because she never really liked photos. But he agreed. They posed together, with their arms around each other, and a passing neighbor took the photo with his phone. When they saw the result, she smiled, satisfied. She said she wanted to have that photo printed and framed. She wanted to put it in the living room, next to the portrait of her husband. She wanted it to be a reminder that love always finds a way, that family isn't who abandons you, it's who comes back for you, that it's never too late to start over. He had the photo printed. He bought a beautiful frame, And when they placed it in the living room, next to his grandfather's portrait, it was perfect. 2 generations, 2 loves, 2 stories of overcoming. His mother stood there, looking at the photos, and he saw a tear roll down her face. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was of gratitude, of relief, of knowing that despite everything it had been worth continuing. 5 years had passed since that day on the dirt road. 5 years that felt like a lifetime. The elderly woman was now 82 years old. Her body was more fragile, her steps slower, but her gaze was still firm, still full of life, still full of love. She spent her days at home, tending the garden, receiving visitors, reading, resting. A peaceful life, a deserved life. Her son was different too. More mature, more present. He had learned that work is important, but it's not everything. That money buys comfort, but it doesn't buy time. That professional success means nothing if you lose the people you love. Now he worked fewer hours. He came home earlier. He spent weekends with his mother. He valued every moment. New beginnings. Ranch continued to operate, now under new management but still with the essence the elderly woman had created. It was still a place of welcome. It was still a place of new beginnings. It was still a place where abandoned seniors found not just shelter but dignity. And that filled her heart with pride, to know that she had created something that would last, that would help people long after she was gone. That Sunday morning, he woke with a strange feeling. He couldn't explain it. He just knew he needed to be with his mother. He went downstairs and found her in the kitchen, making coffee as she always did. She smiled when she saw him. "Up early today, son. Everything okay?" He nodded. "Just wanted to have coffee with you. No rush, no phone, just us two." She liked the idea. They prepared coffee together. They sat at the kitchen table with the windows open, letting the fresh morning air in. They talked about mundane things, about the weather, about the neighbors, about plans for the week, small things that gained weight precisely because they were mundane, because they were normal, because they were proof that they had managed to build a simple and happy life. After coffee, she said she wanted to go to the ranch. It had been a few weeks since she'd been. She missed the place. She felt she needed to go one more time. He agreed without hesitation. They got in the car and left. The journey that was once filled with tension was now peaceful. They talked. They listened to music. They laughed at old memories. It was just an outing, just a son and a mother enjoying the day together. When they arrived at the ranch, they were greeted with the usual joy. Hugs, smiles, questions about how they were doing. The elderly woman greeted each person by name. She remembered everyone, their stories, their likes, and everyone remembered her, the woman who had created that place, the woman who had given them a second chance. They walked around the property. They visited the garden. They saw the chickens. They sat on the porch, talking with some residents. And finally, as they always did, they went to the mulberry tree. The tree was immense now. A majestic tree that provided generous shade and sweet fruit. A tree that was a witness to everything that had happened there. They sat beneath it. She rested her head on his shoulder. They stayed there in silence, just existing, just being. The wind gently rustled the leaves. Birds sang. The sun filtered through the branches, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. It was a perfect moment. One of those moments you know even as you're living it that you'll want to remember forever. She broke the silence with a soft voice. "Son, I need to tell you something." He looked at her, concerned. "What, Mom?" She smiled. "Nothing bad. I just need you to know that I am happy. That my life was good, that I don't regret anything. Not even the bad things, because even the bad things brought me here, to you, to this place, to this life we built together." He felt a tightness in his chest. He didn't like it when she talked like that. It sounded like a farewell, like she was preparing for something, but she just continued. I want you to know that you did everything right, that you saved me in every way someone can be saved, that you gave me not just life, but a reason to live, that I am grateful. Every day I am grateful that you are my son. He held her hand tightly. I'm grateful too, Mom. Grateful that you fought, for surviving, for teaching me what true love is. You are the strongest person I know, and the greatest pride of my life. She squeezed his hand. Back. They stayed like that for a while longer, in silence, at peace, knowing they didn't need to say anything else, that everything that needed to be said had already been said, that the love between them didn't need words to be proven. It had already been proven in every possible way. When the sun began to set, they returned home. She was more tired than usual. He noticed but didn't comment. He just helped her inside, prepared dinner, made sure she took her medication. He tucked her into bed carefully, as if putting something precious to rest. He kissed her forehead, said goodnight, said, I love you, and she replied, I love you too, son, more than you will ever know. That night she slept peacefully. No nightmares, no pain, just peace. And the next morning, when he went to wake her for coffee, she didn't wake up. She had passed during the night, in silence, without suffering, as if she had simply decided she was ready, that she had lived everything she needed to live, that she was at peace. Her son collapsed. Even knowing that one day it would happen, he wasn't prepared. He never would be. He cried, as he hadn't cried since that day on the ranch years ago. He cried for the mother he lost, for the presents he would miss, for the breakfasts they would no longer have, for the conversations that wouldn't happen, for the emptiness that nothing would fill. But in the midst of the pain, there was also gratitude. Gratitude for having had 5 extra years, 5 years they wouldn't have had if he hadn't returned in time, 5 years of rebuilding, of love, of purpose, 5 years that were worth a lifetime. And she had passed peacefully. She had passed knowing she was loved, that she had made a difference, that her life had meaning. The funeral service was simple as she would have wanted, but it was full. Friends, neighbors, residents of the ranch, all came to say goodbye, all with stories to tell, all with memories of how she had touched their lives. And he realized, listening to each story, that his mother had been a hero, not just to him. She had been a hero to dozens of people. She had left a legacy of love that would continue long after she was gone. On the day of the burial, he brought a sprig of mulberries, fruits from the tree she planted, fruits that represented everything she had built. He placed them on the coffin and whispered, "Thank you, Mom, for everything, for fighting, for teaching me, for loving. Rest in peace. You deserve it." The following weeks were difficult. The house seemed empty, too silent. He caught himself preparing 2 coffees instead of 1, turning to comment on something and remembering she was no longer there, hearing noises and thinking it was her arriving, small things that broke his heart every time. But, little by little, he learned to live with her absence. He came to understand that she hadn't really left. She was in the memories. She was at the ranch. She was in every person she helped. She was in every lesson she taught. She was alive in all the ways that mattered. He continued going to New Beginnings Ranch. He continued the work she started, not because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to, because he understood now that it was bigger than the 2 of them. It was about love, about dignity, about showing that no one is expendable, about proving that it's always possible to start over. And every time he went there, he sat under the mulberry tree. He looked at the immense tree and remembered. Remembered the day they planted it together, remembered the conversations they had there, remembered the last time they were there together, and he gave thanks, thanked her for having her, for learning from her, for being loved by her. 1 year after her death, the ranch celebrated its 10th anniversary. They had a party, a celebration of everything that had been achieved. He gave a speech. He spoke about his mother, about how she created that place from unimaginable pain, about how she transformed her own scar into healing for others, about how she taught that love is the only thing that truly matters. And when he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. They planted another tree that day, a new mulberry tree next to the first one, in her honor, so that her legacy would continue to grow. So that even 100 years from now, when no one remembered the names, there would still be proof that she existed, that she mattered, that she made a difference. And as he covered the roots of the new tree with earth, he smiled, because he finally understood. He understood that death is not the end when you leave love behind, that his mother hadn't died. She had simply changed form. She lived now, in every person she helped, in every life she touched, in every heart she warmed. And that was true immortality. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.